minus 1 minute. T minus 50 seconds. T minus 40 seconds. T minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 28th edition of the Time of the Writer Festival, presented by the Centre for Creative Arts. The festival is made possible by the National Arts Council of South Africa, University of KwaZulu-Natal, KwaZulu-Natal Department of Sport, Arts and Culture, Dramatic Artistic and Literary Rights Organization, also known as DALRO, and we express our gratitude and thanks to them for supporting the festival, and to the 100 writers who are participating in this 2025 edition of the festival. This session is called Writing for Change, and I'm very pleased to be joined by three, I won't just call them writers because all of them wear several different hats. You'll see as they go through their presentations and discuss their books that they all are very active in different spheres of the arts. I'm going to start with Fiona Budd. You can see that her background is one of trees, and that will become very apparent during the course of the session why she's chosen that. Fiona is a ballet dancer and a choreographer and a retired professional ballet dancer, and was a former managing director of the South African Ballet Theatre Company. So you may wonder what she's doing here on a panel about books, why? Because she's a ballet dancer. But I'm going to ask her to just tell us a little bit more about her book. I'm going to go through each person and just find out a little bit of their who and their why, and then we'll have a conversation with each other and try and see if we can find similarities between people's purposes. So Fiona, if you don't mind kicking us off and tell us, how did you get from being a ballet dancer to writing this really beautiful little book called A Little Book of Tree Wisdom?
Thank you, Tracy, and good afternoon to everyone and to my fellow panelists, Nathi and Bruce. Yes, I sort of waltzed up to a tree book, being a former ballet dancer. My little book came about completely by accident during COVID. When we went into that period of lockdown where we could go out for I think between 6 and 9 a.m. every morning, and everyone raced outside and slid back under the door by like 59 seconds to 9. I started walking in our neighborhood in Greenside in Johannesburg. And the one day I was just walking, and everything with COVID and everything that was happening in the world was going through my head, and I just leant against this tree. And I was pondering something that was really bothering me, and I felt like the tree gave me a little message about how to cope with things. So I just came home and I wrote it down, and this became a sort of a pattern each day. And I would walk off and go to my tree, and it felt like it was a waltz walking to my tree. I'd have this little rhyme in my head going, "Good morning," I said to my tree, "What news do you have for me?" And it would give me some news, and I wrote it down. And I just thought it was something for me, but it was really helping me during COVID. And I shared it with a friend of mine who's a published poet, and she said to me, "No, you need to share this. Other people, I'm sure, would enjoy it as well." So I went the self-publishing route, and my little book of Tree Wisdom was published. It was about 6 months after I'd written everything down. That's sort of quite a long story as well, but a lovely story of how it all came about. I've just loved the progression of how my little book came into being. I had a grade 11 art student from St. David's, where I'm director of the foundation at St. David's. I asked him to illustrate my book because I just really wanted it to be a collaborative endeavor, and I knew I couldn't do what I had in my head for the illustrations, and I really wanted it to benefit a cause. And well, trees seemed the most obvious thing, seeing as my little tree had given me these tree messages. So I chose an organization, a global tree planting organization called One Tree Planted. So for every tree, every book sold, one tree is planted through One Tree Planted. And JD Shah, my illustrator, he donated half of his fee to Plastic Oceans International, because he also wanted his work to benefit a cause. And so far, I've been able to plant just over 800 trees. So yes, my little tree keeps on giving.
It's incredible. Thank you so much, Fiona. Bruce, you also, Fiona mentioned collaboration. You tend to work collaboratively as well. And I know you also wear many hats as a writer and an educator and a playwright. I think for this session, you've got your playwright hat on, speaking about Femmes Fatale. So maybe if you could just tell us a little bit about how that came about and how you came about, and maybe just tell people a little bit about what Femmes Fatale is. I'm hoping that a lot of people have had the pleasure of watching the production, but for those who haven't, perhaps you can give us a teaser and they'll book seats the next time they see it in their town.
Sure. So I think it was in 2019, the cabaret artist Elsie Zietsman, who is a good friend of mine, approached me and mentioned that she wanted to do a cabaret dealing with gender-based violence in South Africa, and wanted me to write the cabaret for her, the script. And at the time, I said to her, "Oh, I don't know if that's such a good idea. You know, I'm a white, middle-aged, cisgender guy. What right do I have to be dealing with this topic? Like, surely you should have someone whose voice needs to be heard. You know, who am I to be the person to write this?" And her response was, "Who are you not to?" Which I thought was such an interesting call to action and call to arms. And subsequently, the big lesson in the whole process of creating the script and collaborating with Elsa B and the amazing director Eloise Claassen and Tony Bentel and all the other people involved in the production, is that part of the reason why gender-based violence is as prevalent as it is because there is a sort of dislocation and a sense of not taking responsibility or accountability for it. You know, oh, it's just something that happens to predominantly women and children. And the fact that there aren't enough men doing things to make a difference is one of the major contributing factors. So then, yeah, I initially said no, and nobody says no to Elsie Zietsman. And the process thereafter, we involved an amazing PhD academic named Nahama Brody, who was doing her dissertation on gender-based violence research in Southern Africa, and handed me a folder about this thick. It was one of the most harrowing sort of research immersions that I've ever had to experience. And it was just case after case of real gender-based violence issues that have, you know, incidents that have taken place, and all the statistics and the data associated. And then I would then, on Sunday afternoons, because they're generally not the happiest time for me, I would then use Sunday afternoons to immerse myself in the material and then bring characters to life that were based on sort of, you know, aspects of the different actual people that were involved in these cases and incidents, and sort of honor them and give them voices without isolating or mentioning anyone particularly or specifically. And so, yeah, and then the show was on ice for most of 2020 because of COVID, and was then relaunched in 2021 and did exceptionally well. Alcibi went on to win many awards for the show. Best show overall at the Art Club Festival in 2022, I think, as well. So it seems to have really had an impact. A slow start, but it eventually got there.
I mean, that phrase that she said to you, "Who are you not to write it?" I think is incredibly interesting, because I think, people's first reaction to, as you say, hearing about a man writing about a topic that primarily affects women and children. But I think she makes a really good point that that's often, what kind of prevents us from getting anywhere with gender-based violence, is that we're not necessarily looking at all sides of the problem. You mentioned Nacham Brody, and I think I've read her research, and she's an incredible researcher and writer. Did your perception about gender-based violence, about the topic, and about your feelings about it, did it change during the process of writing this piece?
I think only in the sense that I became more educated and aware of just how bad the scourge was. And it's deeply disturbing, the lengths that many of these, it's men, the lengths that these men will go to in order to inflict violence upon women and children. It's just, they come through the roof, they come through windows, they hide under beds, they wait in the dark. And it's just, as a man with many privileges, I can walk around, and yes, anyone in South Africa has to be careful about crime, and we're always sort of have our spidey senses on, and we're alert as to whether or not we might be in danger. But I enjoy a liberty and a freedom that the average woman and child in South Africa just cannot even conceive of. And that was, I had a concept of the reality that is lived by women and children in this country. But this process, as I said, was not only an immersion. I was thrown in the deep end in terms of what the reality is like. And just, anyone who's relying on public transport, having to get home from work after hours in the dark, it's just, there's something terrifying and frightening hiding in the dark. And we tell children not to get scared of these monsters and these terrible things, but the reality is that they're real. And it's my fellow men, it's my fellow South African men who are unfortunately the perpetrators, the ones responsible. And it's also predominantly men that we know. So it's usually family members or romantic partners that are the most likely to inflict violence upon women and children. It's not this. That was one of the things that really struck me the most, is that you always think it's going to be this scary stranger that looks evil, that you've never conceived of before. But the reality is that most of the men that are doing these terrible things to our women and children are generally related to them or know them very well. It's people, teachers, postal workers, people who are line managers. And that's what's so frightening about it. And so the narratives that we use in Fairness Vital had scenarios that predominantly created around that situation of, where the victims were victimized by people that they knew, because that's the reality. You have, so many South African men that are having their wives killed, or, there's just, it was really overwhelming, because the information and the stories, just as I said, the folder was massive, and the folder itself was inexhaustible. I mean, it wasn't even the tip of the iceberg in terms of the information that was available, and the research that Nechama was aware of. It was just a sort of condensed version of what she suggested that I use as reference for the characters.
Thank you very much for that. I know Elsie approached you to write it as a cabaret, but when she did initially approach you, did you think cabaret would work as a medium to talk about a subject like this?
So cabaret is actually my first love. I mean, that's how I came to know Elsie. Was I used to perform my own cabarets around the country for numerous years, and I always wrote about quite serious topics around LGBTQ plus issues. So, and one of the characters in one of my shows was a lesbian woman speaking about gender-based violence that lesbian women, particularly in the townships, are vulnerable to because of stigma and fear and lack of awareness. And I used the story of Yudi Similani, who was a lesbian soccer player, and I think she was stabbed something insane, like 37 times, and found in the gutter, purely because she was lesbian. And so cabaret is a really powerful tool because you have these monologues and these stories that are usually very heartfelt and very hard-hitting. And then the music sort of brings you back to your senses and creates almost like a buffer so that you don't completely overwhelm and traumatize the audience, because you don't want to do that either. You want to create awareness, you want to share a story, you want to educate an audience, but you also want to woo them to a certain degree as well, and make sure that you don't completely alienate and upset and traumatize the audience. And I think that's why cabaret is such a beautiful modality and form of storytelling, because it uses music. There is comic relief, but it's done in such a way that it never negates or takes away from the gravitas of the subject matter. And people are often surprised, when it comes to cabaret, because you think when you hear the term cabaret, you just think of like frothy, fun, familiar singing. But every single cabaret I've ever seen has had some sort of root message that is anything but frivolous and frothy. And I think that's why I love it so much, is because people come and see it thinking, oh, it's just entertainment, but hats off to Elsie for wanting specifically to tackle something so serious. And I think that's why the show took a while to get off the ground in the beginning, because we had everybody coming off the back of COVID. Everybody was traumatized. There was a lot of mental health issues going on. People were stressed. Many people had lost their jobs. Many people, like myself included, lost very close family members to COVID. So something like a show dealing with gender-based violence wasn't on a top priority for people to go and see after a full day of work. So it was difficult in the beginning, and then gradually people became aware that the show wouldn't leave you, wanting to throw yourself off a bridge. That there was an uplifting message, and that there was a sense of promoting awareness, but also a very practical and pragmatic call to action. Because unfortunately, the research has found that there isn't much that can be done to prevent something like gender-based violence other than promoting awareness. And there's also, a belief that gender-based violence is only something that happens in the lower echelons and the lower income groups, and that's not true. You have people of every cultural background, very, very wealthy doctors, lawyers, people of all levels of education who are committing these terrible atrocities on women and children. So there is, in the beginning, the way I challenged Elsie was to say, aren't we going to be preaching to the choir? I mean, you want to do a cabaret. Theatre audiences are going to be people that are generally more au fait, generally more quote unquote woke in terms of diversity and awareness and political openness. And the truth is that, people who commit gender-based violence are among us. They look like the rest of us. There's no specific type of person that is a gender-based violence perpetrator. And that's why there's no limit to the amount of awareness that we can and should promote. And I think also we used the opportunity to, one of the characters was a trans woman. And that was also something that we could create more awareness of, because transphobia in association with gender-based violence is a whole other scourge that takes place in South Africa that most people know nothing about. It's one of the most dangerous things to be, is a trans-identifying or non-binary or gender non-conforming person in sub-Saharan Africa. It's literally just as identifying as that can have you killed, because there's so much stigma, there's so much prejudice and just violence. It's terrible.
Thanks very much, Bruce. Nathi, you also wear several hats. You're a writer, illustrator, cartoonist. Could you tell me a little bit about your background in being a cartoonist, like how you began to draw cartoons and what drew you to the profession in the beginning? And then tell us a little bit about the book that you've released.
So it's actually interesting that my fellow panelists have mentioned COVID. I also have a little story about COVID. But I've been cartooning since 2014, actually, while I was still in my second year of university. And I would do political cartoons just to, to criticize our leaders at that time. And at that time, it was Jacob Zuma. And, he came across a lot of criticism under my pen as a cartoonist. And I've also just been inspired by, your Zapiro, your John Curtis, your Dr. Jack, earlier on as a kid. And I currently draw now for Daily Maverick. We do social justice cartoons under the banner Ubuntunes, where we represent those that are marginalized in South Africa, a lot of our communities. And so that is my journey as a cartoonist. But just to touch on COVID-19, because I'd also like to share a story there. So lockdown happened, and I guess my first children's book that was aimed really at writing for a cause came by this children's book by the name of Duma Says. And Duma grows up in cramped housing in an unknown township in South Africa. And I grew up in cramped housing myself in Chesterville in Durban. So I could say that when I wrote Duma Says, in a way, it was almost like a biography. But Duma was surviving during COVID. So the question for Duma Says was, how do we expect those that are living in marginalized communities to survive and thrive during COVID? Because a lot of us, a lot of people really during COVID, they could afford sanitizers, they could afford masks, but people living in cramped housing and in marginalized communities couldn't. So in a way, this children's book that I started in 2020 during COVID was to ask not only to educate kids about the coronavirus and how to keep safe, but also to plant that question and to plant that seed of asking, how are we expecting people who are living in marginalized communities to survive? And so that after that children's book, on COVID, October 7th happened. And I've known about the Middle East conflict for a very, very long time. I think my earliest cartoon that I did was in 2014, while I was drawing for the Daily Vox. And so October 7th happened. And since I drove for the Daily Maverick and under the banner Ubuntu's, where we create cartoons on social justice, I created 2 cartoons. One of them comparing the Israeli state and our apartheid state as being the exact same. And the second one, the second cartoon in which I got a bit of backlash for, was really just showing South Africa's Ubuntu, spirit of Ubuntu, and basically saying that never again is now. So I got a bit of backlash for that. There was some letters written to my editor asking that I should be fired from my position. Fortunately for me, the Daily Maverick stuck by me, and I still have a job there. And then that didn't quite stop. So our lawyers approached the ICJ with the charge of genocide against the Israeli government. And as a South African, coming from apartheid, this was the time that we needed to actually capture this moment. And how were we going to capture this moment, and how were we going to continue educating kids in pressing times? So that came in a form of this coloring book. But we didn't want to make it a coloring book. We wanted the book to be really like a gateway into Palestine, into Palestinian history, the struggle of the Palestinians, and what does South Africa have in common with the people of Palestine, and the ongoing genocide, really, to bring that awareness to young minds, and not just young minds, but also adults as well, who have no idea about the conflict. A lot of people in my community, in the Black community, have no idea what's been happening in the Middle East for more than 76 years. So we wanted to create this coloring book that aims to touch on that history. But also we wanted to take very complex issues and make them easily accessible to the little ones as well. And of course, that required research. We had to consult with a number of people. We consulted with journalists on the ground who are covering the genocide. We consulted with parents and teachers, about the content that we were to feature in the coloring book. We also consulted with anti-Zionist Jewish scholars like Ilan Pape before we published this book. And the aim of this coloring book really was to tell a story, and in that story, there had to be echoes of hope and freedom. We had to highlight the injustices that's been happening with Palestinians, and just to also link South Africa's apartheid system and what is currently the Israeli system, which is also a form of apartheid. And as Nelson Mandela said, which I included in the coloring book, our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. And I completely agree. And just being a South African, coming from cramped housing, coming from a disadvantaged background, I really felt the responsibility as an artist, the responsibility as a writer and cartoonist to actually do something and capture this moment and educate the young minds, and just to also teach a form of activism in young minds. So when they grow up, they know what injustices are. They know what oppression is. They know what human rights violation looks like. And they know what the genocide looks like. And so, yeah, now we have this coloring book. Of course, writing for a cause has gotten me into a little bit of a trouble as well with the coloring book. The first backlash, because the book launched last year on the 25th of February. So we launched the book, and we had an official book launch in May of last year. And at the end of May, the Jewish Board of Deputies in Cape Town came across the coloring book. And, they accused it of being anti-Semitic. They were, quote unquote, appalled that this kind of material exists in a democratic South Africa. So that was, the first form of backlash that, I'd received over the coloring book. And of course, messages of hate flooded my inboxes. I mean, I've never, ever received so much hate in my life. There was messages on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram. I've had people saying that, if they come across this coloring book, they will burn it. I've had people saying that I would love to purchase a number of this coloring books so I can use it as toilet paper. So, it's been quite a journey with the backlash. And of course, the exclusive books situation as well that we had last year through the backlash that we had received. And so exclusive books, what had happened was the book was removed from the shelves through Zionist pressures. And a lot of pro-Palestinian groups were not happy about that. So for a whole week, there were chants of boycotting exclusive books and to reinstate the coloring book, the fact that we need Palestinian content on our shelves, whether you agree or disagree with it. So that whole situation with exclusive books lasted about a week, to the point where exclusive books had to respond. And their response was, they put out two statements. Their response was, we do not censor or approve books. And then their second response was, after carefully reviewing the content of this coloring book, we found it not to be offensive. So now it's back on our shelves. So, that was quite the journey with exclusive books last year. And just to also touch on another piece of controversy that happened as early as last month at East Jerusalem, where a bookshop was raided by Israeli police, and they held the coloring book as an example for incitement of violence and hate, which I have to say that there is no pages in the coloring book that incite hate or violence, only lessons in empathy and justice. So that raid happened last month. Two raids, actually. The first was around the 9th of February, and the recent happened about a week or two ago. Same bookstore, same situation with, with these coloring books and other books that are written by Palestinian authors and Israeli authors, and being accused of terrorism material that aim to incite hate and violence. So, it's been quite a journey with this coloring book. And now we are here today.
Thanks very much, Nathi. And just to make the point that while you say there's no, call to violence in the books, there is, a belief that just the phrase "from the river to the sea" is calling for the annihilation of the state of Israel. So how would your response? What would your response be to that? And also, I find it interesting that your immediate response to something as horrendous as the 7th of October. Is to cartoon about it. And I know that's what a cartoonist's job is, but I'm just wondering where your impulse came to write this book to something that happened, to what happened on the 7th of October would be to write a book, telling a broader history instead of focusing on what happened on the 7th of October.
Just to start about the phrase "from the river to the sea," for me, it's not an anti-Semitic phrase. For me, it's an inspirational call for freedom, justice, and coexistence for the Palestinian people. And just to, talk about the book and how it came about from October 7th. So Palestinians have been dehumanized for more than 70 years. And this was way before October 7th. So this has been happening for a very, very, very long time. So I wanted, because I felt at the time when we were coming up with this coloring book, is that I felt that the world has forgotten about Palestinians. And so my responsibility at that time as an artist and as a cartoonist and writer is to rehumanize a people that's been dehumanized for the longest of time. And the best way to do that was to tell a story where I start with the land of Palestine, and we then talk about the injustices of the Nakba, the occupation. We then also mention literary icons like Edward Said and Ghassan Kanafani. We talk about activists like Ahid Tamimi. We mention Nelson Mandela, just to show our link to the people of Palestine as being a South African and what he said when he was still alive. So the whole idea really was to rehumanize Palestinians, was to celebrate Palestinian history and culture, to remind people that these are people that exist and they deserve our humanity. And just to ask the question, where is the humanity, by the way, for these women and children that are being slaughtered? And also recently, I think this morning, the ceasefire has been cancelled and the genocide is continuing. So I think, writing for a cause has not been more important than it is right now. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Nathi. Fiona, I'd just like to ask you, so the purpose behind your book, what were you hoping that it would do when you set it out into the world, and what kind of response has your book received?
Thanks, Tracy. I was hoping it would just be helpful to others, like it had been to me, maybe give a message of hope. I mean, Nathi mentioned hope, and I think we all need hope, and we need hope realized, not hope, because eventually you can lose hope if things don't change or things don't get better or if something doesn't shift for you. So I think with the little messages, I wanted it to bring hope to people, if it just gave them a little bit of a spark of inspiration or comfort. And then with the tree side of supporting trees, it is a sort of a very strong environmental cause for me, that the trees are the lungs of the world, and they are being sort of decimated in many areas, and just trying to restore that and bring back some harmony and greenery and beauty to our world. And I feel a strong connection with trees. I have since I was little, and anything I can do to support that. I'm happy if my little book can do that, and one tree at a time. And that's from all of us. I think that's what it just takes, is one step at a time, one tree at a time. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's particularly moving that you started your book during COVID, and you talk about your COVID, how you discovered the tree supported you during COVID. I just want to show there's a tiny little leaf in the book as well, because I think what I really loved about the book is that there's so many different parts to it, that yes, it's a story, but it's also got little blank pages in that people could write their own thoughts and their own responses to trees. But could you also just tell us a little bit about the story of this little leaf. Why is it in the book? How did it come about, and where does it come from?
Yes, I really, again, it was very, pardon the pun, organic, how this book came about. Literally grew from a seed, grew little shoots and branches. And one of those was the bookmark, which I felt like it needed a little bookmark, but I thought, but it needs a tree bookmark. And I'd been speaking with, he was, the late Gianni Mariano, who was one of our trustees of the foundation at St. David's, but he's the board member of Artist Proof Studio. And we were just sort of, brainstorming some ideas. And he said to me, speak to Pumani Paper Mill, because they make paper out of tree fiber. And I thought that'd be perfect, because I wanted to have some element of a tree in my book. The visual of a leaf bookmark I wanted, but I also wanted some physical that you could touch elements. So I went to see Pumani Paper Mill and looked at all their different tree fibers, papers that they had there, and just fascinating stories and the communities that they work with to make this paper, and identified this, it's a ficus tree fiber, which I really liked. And then I went to Artist Proof Studio, and they cut my first set of bookmarks there. So that goes into each book. I now cut my own, but it's part of the creative process for me still when I'm doing a new set of books, like cutting the little leaves. And I always, when I put them in a book, I flip through the book and I put it in the page, and I feel like that when the person gets that book, that little message is going to be meant for them. Along with all the other messages. So I hope that it just gives everybody who picks up a book, a little bit of inspiration and hope. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I think that's one of the really lovely elements of the book, and also how the book came about, that it wasn't just your endeavors on your own, but that you undertook a crowdfunding campaign. Because I think, for a lot of people watching or listening, they might think they've got a cause that they're very passionate about and they want to write about, or they want to speak out about, but they might go to a publisher and the publisher says, I'm sorry, this is not the kind of book we're looking at for at the moment. Could you talk a little bit about how the book, how you funded it, and how it became a reality from the idea that you first had?
Yes, I mean, what I loved with this whole process was it's like each time I just took a step and kind of the way was revealed, somebody connected me or joined me to the next step of the book. So it was the poet Ruth Loans, who she was the one who'd said, I should publish this book. So she introduced me to her publisher to self-publish. But I knew that costs were going to be, it wasn't something I could just do. I would need to raise funds for that. And I'd wanted to be doing this for a cause as well. So I set up a campaign on BackaBuddy, on the BackaBuddy platform. And that was where I raised my funds, and among family and friends and connections, I just said, I'm doing this book, and this is how I would like to sort of benefit, trees through it. And I was able to raise the funds to publish my book through that. So like you say, it's thinking, so you can think it's a daunting task and I have to find a publisher, but there are these little baby steps all along the way that bring it to fruition.
I think it ties in with that message of hope that you said, that somebody, they might just be hopeful about writing a book and thinking that the obstacles are too insurmountable to publish them. But I think you've shown that it is possible. And even if it's a little book, as a little book of tree wisdom is, it can make a difference and go into the world and brighten people's day and give them some sense of hope for the future. Bruce, I know that the show's been to several venues, it's been at lots of festivals, it's been at the Atterbury, it's been at the market. Could you speak a little bit about how the show has been received, and if you've had any interaction with audiences or any engagement with people that have watched the shows, and what kind of feedback you have had from them?
Thanks, Tracy. So the response was unbelievable, better than I'd even hoped. I wasn't really sure what the reception would be from a marketability. I mean, I have a background in advertising and marketing, so I thought that it was, I wasn't sure how commercially viable a show about gender-based violence was going to be. in terms of bums on seats and getting people to come and watch something like that. And the show gained momentum. The Alsabi is a tour de force, and the show was just so well received. The performance that I saw at the Market Theatre opening received a very well-deserved standing ovation that just resounded and just kept on going. And then one of the things I'm most proud of is because it was such a delicate situation, as I am a middle-aged cisgender white man, I had to be so careful that I was creating a platform to give voices to people who haven't got voices, but I had to be very careful to try and keep my voice out of it, if that makes any sense. So I was using my abilities as a writer and my privilege and my education and all the wonderful things that I have at my disposal, powerful resources that I have, but I couldn't speak on behalf of anyone else. And I learned that from my time. I used to work at the Inova Health Institute and helped organize a conference for various trans and gender non-conforming organizations from around the country. And there was this conference that we had, and we had all these organizations that were brought in. And even though I was the organizer, the project manager, and often would have to sort of facilitate the process, it was made very clear to me, and it was very important, that my voice wasn't the voice that needed to be heard. And so the big challenge here for me was that I made sure that all the characters were a composite of actual characters, of things that were said, of things that really did happen, so that I wasn't confabulating or making things up or putting words in people's mouths. So that was the one thing. And then, and because of my previous job, I had various members of the trans community who sent me messages personally to thank me for having my involvement in the project, and because they felt that they had seen themselves reflected in the work. And that was a huge triumph for me, because it felt like it's such a dangerous precipice to navigate. The moment you're speaking on behalf of another demographic or another group of people, and the fact that the community, the most vulnerable community, in my opinion, felt that the way that they'd been represented had been done in a way that they resonated with, was a wonderful experience for me. But still, a situation where I now feel like, yes, it was great that I was given this wonderful opportunity, and that Alsabi managed to convince me to do it. But it doesn't take away from the fact that we need more voices from these communities speaking directly. And so the rest of us, I feel, need to see what we can do to create platforms, situations, and environments where these voices can be heard directly from the individuals that are being impacted and affected. And the reason why why this was so much easier was because, unfortunately, we live in a reality where the voice of a white male in South Africa is heard so much quicker and clearer. And I look forward to a time where we don't have to leverage that kind of privilege to get the message out there.
I mean, I hear you, and I think it's a very good point that you're making. I think that live performance, cabaret, theatre is one of the most powerful ways to kind of make people aware of a topic or get them emotionally invested in it, and to show some empathy. And I'm thinking of Kaleka Patuma's No Easter Sunday for Queers, which also had a very brief run at the Market Theatre, and how much more difficult it has been for her to stage that production on different platforms around the country. It's written by a young Black woman, incredibly powerful voice, incredible powerful writing, but in my opinion, hasn't been given the platform that it deserves. So I think you raise a very important point about, that it's as much as one can try and speak about an issue and speak to an issue. First prize is always to hear from, people that are directly affected and directly impacted. I'm also wondering if, the play has been performed at a lot of festivals and theatres. Have you had a lot of young people watching it, or was it just mostly been adults? What is the age demographic been of people that have been watching? Is that something that you do know, that you are aware of?
From what I gathered, I mean, unfortunately, this is Elsabe's livelihood. So in an ideal world, we would have received generous funding and she would have been able to go on the road. And she did apply to, I can't even, innumerable funding proposals were sent out in the hopes of being able to get this message out there. We also looked at the possibility of taking the structure of the cabaret and the characters and then having the shows translated into several of the 11 official languages, and then also using that as a platform for young performers of various demographics and backgrounds to be able to tell that, their version of the story. So even though the basic structure of the cabaret was written as a bespoke cabaret for Elsabe, the characters and the stories that take place with the characters stand on their own and could have been told by any performer of any cultural background. And so we did, and we were in talks with several very influential people, but unfortunately it always came back to the commercial viability. That always ends up being the issue, and unfortunately, one of the things that we also need to consider is that in my opinion, and this is quite a controversial opinion, we overburden artists to be the conscience of society when society is not supporting us financially to be able to be the clarion callers that we're supposed to be. And so I think it's incredible that artists continue, particularly in the performing arts, to take the flag up and go to arms and create these stories that need to be told and create the awareness that needs to be put out there. But unfortunately, we also need to live and we also need to survive. And those tickets need to be sold so that we can eat and have medical aid and all of those kinds of things. So it's the situation where the artist is always driven by this passion and this desire to tell the stories for change. Because theatre in this country, we have a long history of theatre for change, particularly at the Market Theatre. But we're now at this crossroads, especially in South Africa, unfortunately, with our ministers of culture and sport not supporting artists the way that they need to be supported. Our artists are starving. There's no work. There's just no infrastructure, and it's devastating. And if anything, my next production won't be about gender-based violence. It will be about the plight of the artists in South Africa. Because that is one of the biggest tragedies for me, is that we have, household names, South African legends who are dying in poverty, despite having been the founders of the entertainment industry in South Africa. People like Charlene Sirty Richards, and it's sad and inexcusable.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think if anybody's listening who has large buckets of money, throw them at artists to support the performing arts, and so that you can make that play. Because I do think, in as much as the cause of violence against women, and I think where the two intersections is that people are far more vulnerable to be abused and taken advantage of when they are in conditions where they'll do anything to put food on the table. And unfortunately, a lot of artists are in that very precarious position. Are there any places where people can watch the cabaret in the months ahead? Are there any performances that you know that are scheduled?
So no, Elsa B is now working with another writer at the moment because I wasn't available, and they are now doing incredible work. So look out for Drama Productions. She has another show that was written by the incredibly talented Johan Slabbert, for Pier Bernardus and a Chardonnay, and that's her personal story of how she survived as an artist through COVID and the drama that she went through. She basically lost everything, like most artists did. And then she had another fantastic one-woman show called Road Trip that was also written by Johan. So those two shows are their, I don't want to say cash cows because that's a misnomer in the industry, but that's sort of, these are shows that are generating the income for them to keep going. And so you'll be able to catch those shows. And I know that she's got 2 new shows in the pipeline, one featuring the Hollywood actor Arnold Vosloo. So my advice would just be to go and see what Elsa B is up to on Facebook. Her stuff is always poignant. It always has a real deep message. There's always something promoting awareness and sensitivity towards the plight of our fellow human beings, and just about humanity, really, and compassion and empathy for one another. So yeah, I would suggest anybody who's curious to do that.
Thanks very much, Bruce. And Nathi, I mean, you have mentioned that exclusive books are now stuck in your book. Can you tell people that are watching where else they can get hold of both this book and your other titles? And are your Duma titles? Because there's more than one book in that series, I understand.
Yes, so there's for the Duma title, there are 3 stories. If I'm not mistaken, there's no other place that is talking Duma says at the moment, because I mean COVID has passed, so it's a little difficult to have the book still available out there. But for the coloring book, if you're in Joburg, you can contact Book Circle Capital. If you're in Cape Town, the Book Lounge stocks the coloring book. If you're in Durban, Beto Hikma Ike's Bookshop stocks the book. And so what had happened last year, we had partnered with Penny Appeal South Africa, and they have a Gaza appeal project where they send humanitarian aid to the people of Palestine and those that are affected. And the proceeds of the books that were sold last year, which were 13,000 copies in South Africa, went to Penny Appeal South Africa project, Gaza project to help with humanitarian aid. So so that's where the book is currently available. And I just want to say that for the support that I've received for the coloring book, it's been immense, it's been massive. And I just want to, to show my gratitude for the support. And, humanity need to shine. We need those that are oppressed all around the world, not just Palestinians. We have a situation in Sudan, in Congo. We need all of those that are affected to see freedom, to see a future for their respective countries.
Thank you very much for those closing remarks, Nathi. And Fiona, if people wanted to get a copy of your book, A Little Book of Tree Wisdom, where are they able to get a copy from?
In Johannesburg, I have them at the Woodlands Spa out in Mildersdrift and the Random Harvest Nursery, and then the Green Room, which is in Parkhurst, a Pirates Bowling Club and Village Fair in Greenside, and then in Clarence at the Bibliophile Bookshop there, and then also in the duty-free mall at Oliver Tambo Airport. They are stocked there at Taste of Africa. And then I have them on Amazon as well. And my website is treewisdom.net, and that has details of all the different stockists and a bit more about the book.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I'd just like to say thank you very much to my three guests, Fiona, Nathi, and Bruce. We don't have any questions that have come through. As for the previous panels, questions going once, going twice. So I just want to say thank you all for your time, and thank you to those who've watched. Please make a plan to either watch the continuing online sessions that are going to be presented as part of the festival, and if possible, make your way to the Alliance Française building in Morningside in Durban for the very full program that the Centre for the Creative Arts has on offer, curated by Shafinaz. He's really done a fantastic job, and there's some fabulous, fabulous speakers and topics that are going to be spoken about. And I'd just like to close by just mentioning again that the thanks and gratitude to the National Arts Council of South Africa, University of KwaZulu-Natal, the KwaZulu-Natal Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, and Delro, the Dramatic, Artistic and Literary Rights Organization, for their support of the festival. And please make sure that you tune in to listen to the 100 writers who will be presenting panels over the next couple of days. Thank you very much.